Tonight, we're going to talk about something a little different than what most people are used to talking about. I look at things differently than the average person. To kind of give you an example of that, and I know I won't go into a big, long sermon, so just bear with me. My wife is, anyhow.
I'm the wife, by the way. He's good about introducing his wife. Bob is not good at introducing his wife.
I'm sorry, that's my lovely bride of 23 years faith. Anyhow, David. We all know the story of King David, right? We know how he went out and he killed the giant and his life changed. And we have a tendency to focus on his obedience to God and his willingness to let God guide him, as well as everything else about him, such as the stone that slew Goliath, right? I look at David a little differently. At the time that David and Goliath was around, when a father passed away, his oldest child got 90% of his holdings, his oldest son, okay? Number 2 son got 90% of that. Number 3 son got 90% of that. David was the youngest. David's future was very bleak. In fact, it works out to be where David was going to inherit less than 2 acres of land and 4 sheep, okay? Now, back then, when you were judged by everybody else in the community on what you have, especially if you're a farmer, you know, by the amount of land you have and by the amount of livestock you have, to have less than 2 acres of land and 4 sheep is not a very good start in life. So David's future was bleak because since his property was surrounded by his brother's property, he had no opportunity to grow his property, okay? Because you're limited on the amount of heads of sheep you can have predicated on the amount of land you had. There was no way for him to grow his flock, right? As he started to search for a bride, what bride is he going to find that is willing to settle for a man that only has 2 acres of land and 4 sheep and no hope for advancing himself? How's he going to find a man that's willing to let him marry his daughter when his whole future is going to be 2 acres of land and 4 sheep? Now, the problem was the taxes were so high back then that in reality, by the time David had his own land and his own sheep for 3 years, his sheep would be gone. So then he would just have 2 acres of land, right? So David's future as a teenager was very bleak. And one day, while he's sitting there tending his 4 sheep, he receives a proclamation that was sent out across the land that any man that could come and slay the giant would receive many things. He would receive a chest full of gold. He would never again have to pay taxes. He would receive the king's daughter's hand in marriage and thereby becoming royalty. So David looked at his prospects and he weighed them out. A life spent toiling 2 acres of land, eventually I'll run out of sheep, no hope for a bride, no hope for prosperity, no hope for what we in America would term happiness. Or he could go slay the giant and have a life of wealth, privilege, and prosperity. Now, granted, the risk was he would die, okay? So in order to gain this, he had to risk losing his life and losing this. So he weighed it out and he thought, you know, that's a risk worth taking. That's a fight worth fighting. And he went to the battlefield. One of my favorite biblical people is David's older brother. And the reason he's one of my favorite people is because I am the youngest. I've had an older brother, and I know exactly what poor David was dealing with the day that he made it to the battlefield. Because when he went there to go slay the giant, the first thing that happened is his brother stopped him and started ridiculing him. You know, what are you doing here? You don't have any armor. You're not a warrior. You're just a little boy. Go home and tend to your 4 sheep and leave the fighting to the real men. Now, at that point in time, David had a choice to make. He could choose to stand there and argue with his brother and risk losing the opportunity to go onto the battlefield and slay Goliath, thereby risk losing the opportunity to have a better life than the one he was currently leading. So he ignored his brother and he went on the battlefield, and we all know what happened from there. The point of the story is this. In everything we do, we have to pick our battles wisely. We have to weigh out the costs. okay? As preppers, we look at our future. And there's two things about David that I'm going to come back to as we go along. But as preppers, we look to the future. And it's easy to get caught up in what the future is going to be and lose sight of what our existence is. Okay? But we make a decision. Do we spend our money, invest in it for our retirement? Do we spend our money on that extra vacation? Do we buy the nicer car, or do we continue to drive the car we have? And instead take that money that we would spend on what America classifies as a better lifestyle and invest that into our future with the understanding that dark times are coming. And we're going to make sure that when those dark times hit, those that we love and those that depend on us are going to survive. Okay? The second thing I want to talk about, David, is this. When we look at preppers as a whole, one of the things we see is a lot of conspiracies out there. And there are a lot of people preaching conspiracies, not just talking about them, preaching them. There are a lot of fanatics out there, and a fanatic, like I said last night for those of you that are there, a fanatic is somebody that won't change their mind and can't change the topic. And all they do is scream and holler about the conspiracies. We have to be like David, because David's older brother are the guys that are out there screaming about the conspiracies. We have to tune them out, or we're going to miss our opportunity to make sure that our family has a brighter, better future coming out of the dark times. So that's kind of how I look at things. With that understanding, let's take a look at where we are as preppers today. Who here has been prepping for less than, say, 3 months? Okay, less than 6? Less than a year? Okay. It's easy when we're new to prepping, it's easy to do two things. Actually, it's easy to do three things. The first thing it's easy to do is to get overwhelmed. Okay? We look at all the things that are coming and everything we need to do to get ready for that, and we get overwhelmed because we know we're going to miss something somewhere. Okay? The second thing that's easy to do is to get caught up in the conspiracies and to get caught up in the doomsday event or the society-ending event, causing us to do the third thing, which is to lose sight of why we're doing it. Okay? My wife and I had a conversation as we were driving over here because my beliefs in how I will be in the future have changed. And it's shocking to her. It really is. I'm the type of person, if you can show me I'm wrong, I will do a complete 180 and go a different direction. That's how I am. But you have to show me I'm wrong. So for my wife to hear me talking about things like establishing a community and building a society for the future, when she hears me talk about things like once we have done our preps and completed everything that we need for our future, we don't stop, we continue on, continue to prep so that when we deal with strangers or refugees and all of this, we have the means to help them continue on and survive. And the reason it's a shock to my wife is because my philosophy for so many years has been a bullet is cheaper than a meal. I'm limited on meals and I can reload my bullets, you know? So now for me to go from that to, no, we need to help these people is a huge change for me. One of the reasons why those changes is there is this. I recognized I'm not preparing to survive a society-ending event. I'm not preparing to make it through the first 180 days of dying time where 88 to 94% of our population ceases to exist. It's not what I'm preparing for. 100 years from now, in this area, if you walk into a public school in Hot Springs, Arkansas, 100 years from now, their history books are not going to talk about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. They're not going to talk about Abraham Lincoln. They're not going to talk about all of the great men that helped form, build, and shape the United States of America. They're going to be talking about the founding fathers that brought this community out of the chaos, brought back rule of law, and built something for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. So I've stopped preparing to survive because I'm going to survive. I will be one of the 6% that survive. I know this because I'm mentally, emotionally, physically prepared to do what has to be done to get through that 180 days. More importantly, though, I'm ready to be one of those founding fathers for our future society. The thing is, I wish I had a chalkboard up here. The thing is if this is the race, this table is the race, and we got people running the 100-meter dash, and they stop there. And then we got people running the half mile, and they stop there. And we got people that are running the full mile, and they stop here. In order to get here, they'll bypass this point, they'll bypass this point, and they will be here. Because this is their goal, this is their finish line, this is the end result of what they are striving for. Okay? As preppers, we set goals. Here's where we are. Today, we're buying food, we're stockpiling water, we're investing in solar energy, we're having wells dug, we're learning how to fortify our home, we're stockpiling weapons and ammo, we are developing the survival mindset, we are understanding the morals of survival, we are mentally and emotionally and physically preparing for the society-ending event so that we can survive it. And many of us, because this is our goal, this is where we'll stop. And if you stop here, you might not make it here, and you definitely have decreased your odds of getting here. Others of us have recognized what the first 180 days will look like, which is a very difficult thing for humans to do. It's very difficult for us to stop and picture a world where there are no police, there are no firemen, there's no telephone, there's no TV, we can't watch Honey Boo Boo, we can't watch Fox News, we can't sit around with our friends criticizing the president and all of his failures, even when he makes the same failures as the previous president that we supported in his failures, right? Don't get me wrong, I support the office. Anyhow, the point is there are many of us that have done what it takes to recognize that starting at day 1, moving through day 180, the closer we get here, everywhere we go, there's dead people. Any food we have to grow or we have to hunt unless we stockpiled it. There are no doctors. We have to rely on ourselves or our spouses or our friends to staple us up or stitch us up, and my wife's been trying to get me to let her practice with the stapler for a while, and I just can't let her do that. The point is there are many of us that recognize what the first 180 days will be like, and we've prepared for that mentally, emotionally, and physically, and we'll make it here. Less than 1% of 1% of 1% of preppers recognize that this is our finish line. This is the community that we help become into existence, that we help found, that we help guide and direct. Because so many of us fail to recognize that this is our finish line, we fail to recognize that in order to get there, we have to survive the event. We have to survive the 180 days. We have to grow and prosper and help others and do what needs to be done to get us to this point. When you run a race, you stop at the finish line. So the question I have for everybody, whether you've been prepping 3 weeks or 3 months or 3 years or 3 decades, is this: what are you preparing for? Are you preparing to get home or get to your retreat or get to safety the day the lights go out? Or are you preparing to be able to see the sunrise on day 181 and be one of the 6 to 12% of us that make it? Or are you preparing 100 years from now to have the history books talk about your name as the founding father of that society.